Cool, thank you, everyone. Morning. Oh, we'll let the latecomers settle down. Don't worry, I'll wait. I'm joking, it's all right, take your time. So, I work at KnowBe4. KnowBe4, if you're not familiar with them, they focus on the human element. So our mission is to help people make better security decisions or better risk decisions every day. And that's what everything's built around. And many of you are probably familiar with like many of security awareness products out there or the techniques that are used. Predominantly, there's a simulated phishing part where you send emails to your colleagues, people saying, can you spot whether this is a phishing thing? Can you report it, or are you going to fall for it? And then when they fall for it, you say, haha, you fell for it. Here's 45 minutes of training that you have to somehow fit into your day and pass an exam at the end. And that's pretty much how our product works as well, although we'd like to say it's a lot better, a lot more sophisticated, and there's bells and whistles attached to it that make it better. But that's just a fundamental. But a lot of times you go out and do this, and it's like, people don't like it, you get their backs up. Often people come to us and say, like, well, we've been running this for a while, our users don't like the phishing emails, they feel like they're being tricked, they hate the security team, they don't want to talk to us. There's all sorts of issues around it. So this whole talk is about, well, some of the strategies that we found work really well with these clients in helping them say, okay, the tools are only one part of it, it's the approach of how you go about it that really makes a big difference. So this is my vanity slide. It basically says I'm awesome. This is the company's vanity slide that basically says KnowBe4 is awesome. And here is a pointless quote just to make you think that I'm a lot more smarter than what I actually am, but it actually has nothing to do with the talk. So the first question I ask of people that are struggling with the security awareness program is, as a security team, how are you perceived by the rest of the organization? People are often like, well, what does that actually mean? And I'm like, well, no, really, like, how are you perceived? When someone does something that they're not sure of, or they might have clicked on a link, or they're trying to push through a project, do they willingly engage with the security team, or is it something that where they see you as the Department of No, or what have you? And a good test for this is like it's the first impressions test. And there's a hotel chain, global hotel chain. They do their customer satisfaction surveys. If you stay in a hotel, they send you an email. It's like on a level of 1 to 5, how happy were you with the swimming pool, the food, the bed, all the aircon, all the views, all that kind of stuff. And they found that people that had a better check-in experience scored everything else higher by comparison to people that had a poor check-in experience. And I think that's very relevant because security teams, when you think about it within organizations, what's the first interaction they have with their colleagues? It's not normally a pleasant one. It's either during induction week where it's like, here's the policy, here's the intranet page, here are 50,000 things you need to be familiar with, and or it's in a project where they're like, we want to push for this project, and they're like, no, no, no. Or it's to get told off for clicking on a link, and here's some training to do. And I think if that's your first engagement, then of course you're not going to have a good relationship, and of course people are going to feel like these guys are tricking me. This department is there just to waste my time. So actually setting out the expectations as to why this is important, why, and you don't have to look far. Every single day there's at least half a dozen UK-based stories about some organisation that's where someone's got phished or social engineered in some way or another, and related to whichever industry you're in. That you can pull upon, say, like, this is why it's important, and this is why we want people to get on board. Folks, there are some seats over here if you want to sit down. It's all good. Also makes it harder for you to run away midway. I think providing the right information is also important. So telling people what it is one thing, but why and how and everything is also important. And I really like this. Like a few years ago, Transport for London, they introduced their LCD boards across their trains and their buses. And this makes it really, really convenient, because before you were like guessing, is the next train going to Arnos Grove or Cockfosters, was my question. And I wasn't sure. And so I, like everyone else, you shuffle, elbowing people out of the way, trying to get to the front of the platform so you could you could jump on train only to realize it's not your train, so then you have to take a step back. And something like this actually removes a lot of that anxiety you have on the platform, because it's providing the right information in the right way, so you can like sit back, listen to your audiobook until your actual train is there. And so like providing the right information is important, but it's not so important that you have to be right all the time. I say this is like winning the argument isn't as important as solving the problem. And sometimes security teams get caught up in winning the argument. The reason why your password must be 20 characters long is because this, and you put it through quantum cryptography and you're trying to crack it, it's whatever. And that's fine, but you're not winning people over with that approach. So provide the right information, but in the right way is really important. Providing the right context is also really important. And this is something criminals are really good at. They know how to make a phishing email really effective by providing it, framing it in the right way. So if we look at some scribbles like this, we say like, well, what is that scribble? And I'll say, well, it's the letter B, because I've now put the letters A and C to either side. Or I can say, oh, it's the number 13, by putting the numbers 12 and 14 to either side. So framing your information in the right context, so providing it at the right time, in the right way, with the right context is absolutely important. And this is also really important for security teams that are reporting up the chain to their execs about why they're doing a security awareness program and why it needs to be effective. Speaking of reporting up the chain, I think metrics is one area that a lot of security teams kind of like struggle with or they get wrong. And I often say 10 times 1 is not equal to 1 times 10. If we think of it like in a more tech way, there's some seats on this side, if you want to come over. If we think of it in a tech way, it's a bit like one machine with 10 vulnerabilities is very different from 10 machines with the same one vulnerability. But when you put it in a metrics-based thing and report it up, it all looks the same. So you're not making an appropriate risk-based decision on that information. So make it in a way that it makes risk sense to the execs. And I think that really helps a lot. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't know who it's attributed to, but I found it on the internet, so it must be true, is a flower is a weed with a marketing budget. And I think this is where a lot of security teams go wrong, is that they don't know how to market their program in the right way. So what they're doing might be the right thing. You've got the right tools, you've got the right intentions, but if you don't market it right, people aren't going to get on board. So what we see a lot of teams doing, they're like, here's some training, go off and do it. And people will begrudgingly go through it, but their behaviors won't change as a result of it, because all they're doing is a tick box exercise. So what the security team does, that didn't work, what do we do? Well, clearly we need to send them more training. So we'll give them more training to do, and this cycle perpetuates and gets worse and worse. So I think what security teams need to do is, when they're rolling out something like this, think less like a trainer and think more like a marketer. So have a campaign in mind, have a process in place where you focus on a few key behaviors, whatever that behavior is, and then you layer it through all the different channels that you have available to you. So whether it be through your simulated phishing, that's training them on spotting a particular behavior or a pattern that you want them to adopt. You have posters, you can have emails, you can have execs talking about it in the meetings, you can have mouse mats, you can have all these sorts of things that go through. What we found at KnowBe4, what really works is storytelling. So a lot of we have this series of video modules, it's called The Inside Man, and there are 5 seasons out at the moment. It's kind of like a Netflix series, so they're short episodes, 5-6 minutes. It's like a drama, so you're watching it engaged for the drama, and at the end it's like, here's some of the key learnings from it. So it's like, did you notice someone tailgated them into the building, they plugged in a USB stick into their machine that they shouldn't have, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really effective way of getting people engaged, and this creates conversations for them as well. So they then often write around the water cooler or on their Slack chat or whatever they use. They're like, did you see the latest episode? This happened, that happened. And then they get the message. Like our colleagues are, across the business, they're clever people. You don't need to be patronizing and say at the end, do not do this, you will not plug in a USB you found in the parking lot. You just show them that this is the consequences, and people can make those connections themselves. I think perceptions really make a big difference. And we often see this on the weather app. On your phone, you probably see it says like it's 24, and then below it says it feels like 22. And the question is, why does it need to say it feels like 22? We have scientifically and accurately measured the temperature at being 24. Our feelings shouldn't matter. But this is the problem with people, is like our feelings do matter, and we're like, it doesn't really matter what science says. I don't care what the thermometer is saying. If I feel like it's warmer or colder than it actually is, I'm going to perceive it in that way. So again, I think it goes back to that question of like simply being right or providing the correct information is not enough. It's providing it in a way that matches people's perceptions and expectations. This is something that Betty Crocker, the cake mix people, realized back in the 60s or 70s when they first came out with their cake mix. Makes me feel like Gordon Ramsay, because you get the cake mix, you add water, stick it in the oven, and out comes a beautifully baked cake. And so they came out with this, and that was their formula. Add water, stick it in the oven, and you get a great cake. And it wouldn't sell at all. And they were confused. They've just made the cake baking process as simple as possible. Why isn't this selling? And so they went to some behavioral scientists, and they're like, why isn't this selling? This is such a brilliant idea. And they said, well, it feels a bit like cheating. The people don't feel involved in the process, and this is no different than just buying it off the shelf. So they went back and they radically changed the formula, where now you get the cake mix, you add water, but you also add 2 of your own eggs. And just a simple act of cracking your own eggs and putting it into the mix and mixing it together made people feel involved in the process. It made them feel like, I'm actually doing some cooking, like, step aside, Nigella Lawson, or whoever you want to compare yourself to. This is me actually baking something. And I think, again, like when your training is so basic or patronizing to the point where it's just like, oh, don't click on this link, and this is why you shouldn't click on the link, and you're not engaging people. But if you make it a bit interactive, some people have a great success in doing things like cyber games or escape rooms or things like that in a way that it gets people involved. And once you get someone involved, their learning increases so much, but not just their learning, their behavior changes. And so when you do it really well, you can influence the way people think as individuals, and you can change their behavior. And that's the great first step. But that's not the entire step, or that doesn't go the entire way. Because what we really want to do, we don't just want to change individuals' behaviors, we want to change collectively the teams and the organization as a whole. And that's what we refer to as the culture. So it's a bit like if you join a video call, video conference, and everyone's got their cameras on, I'm going to turn my camera on as well. Why? Because I think this is the way that people do things around here. That's what an example of a cultural change. If I work in an office and I see everyone, whenever they leave their machine, whether it's to just go to the printer, to grab a water, or to the toilet, they lock their machine as soon as they walk away from it. I'm going to start locking my machine as well, because it's the culture, it's the way things are done. And this really becomes the kind of like holy grail of security awareness, because you have to put in the effort to educate that first generation, so to speak. But once it becomes embedded as a behavior change, you don't actually need to spend as long to train other people, because they just realize this is just the way we do things around here. We see a stranger walk in, we're like, where's your lanyard? Can I help you? Are you lost? Get out. That kind of stuff. There's lots of sort of like scientific studies done around what makes culture, and this is like just an example. There's like 7 sort of like portions of your psychology. I don't really understand this stuff, but there's that. There's way to measure it. There's metrics and everything, and this is all available as white papers and everything. If you're into that academic style of it, I'm not really an academic, as you can probably tell. So, but what I'm like is, okay, what is there that we can do to improve culture. So I went around and I spoke to a dozen companies around the world that were invested heavily in security culture. And I came to the conclusion that for most companies that they're doing culture wrong. And one of the best examples of security culture or culture change is that of Martin Luther King Jr. And because his movement was a cultural movement, when you look at it, it's about changing people's perceptions, thoughts and ideas and how they interact in society. This is what we're trying to do just on a security basis. We're trying to change people's thoughts, behaviors, ideas and how they operate within that. So in his famous speech, what did he say? He said, I have a 7-point strategy. We are going to hit these milestones by Q1 and these milestones by Q2. No, of course not. Yes, he said, I have a dream. Why? Because he realized culture change or any movement like that, you can't break it down into specific milestones in that way. It's a long-haul process that takes a lot of time, and you have to win the hearts and minds of people, which again goes back to things like, how is your security team viewed? Do they trust you? So, same thing like, do you trust the communities within which you live and interact and work with? Are the establishments welcoming and all that kind of stuff? So, it's one of those things that you can see, there's the law of diffusion of innovation, which whenever you're trying to get a culture change or you're trying to, a lot of marketers use this for when they're launching a new product, something's new launched, so Apple come out with their iPhone. There's some innovators which are going to be there. Then there's early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then your grandparents will finally get it at the end. Sorry, that's a very stereotypical statement. Yeah, my mum got an iPhone before I got an iPhone. So, you can imagine who the laggards probably are. And what we find is that the early adopters is just beyond that is where you get what they call the tipping point, and that's where most people start to adopt and accept things culturally. So you've probably seen when Teslas first came out, or electric vehicles as a whole, it was like, what is this? I'm never giving up my gasoline powered engine. You can pry it from my cold dead fingers. And then you start seeing more and more people taking it like, it's not just the hippies. And then you see more and more people, and then it becomes like, then you find yourself on the website specking it out and saying how much is the monthly plan and, how much I can get it for. And that's kind of how it works. So what's really useful is to find those early adopters within your organization. And sometimes they call them culture carriers, sometimes they call them security champions within your organization. We see this on social media a lot. People will identify influencers within their specific field, and they will like, you're an influencer, let me send you some of my latest widgets, and then you can do a video review of it, or you can post on Instagram what a brilliant product it is and what have you. We need to do the same thing within organizations, and that really, really works. So if you identify that there are 20 people in the organization who are really keen about security, they adopt good behaviors themselves, they're like the early adopters. Let's bring them in together from across the organization, make them part of the Security Champions program. We can give them hints and tips of what we're doing, how they can give us information on what's happening on the ground in the organization, which policies are working, which aren't working, where do people bypass security measures. And also, it can bring to light, if it's like an international organization especially, or just geographically separate, you'll find microcultures across the organization, which you can then be aware of and identify. Because it's very easy to implement one broad security policy that says everyone will do things this way, but you need to understand how they're doing it across the world in their offices and in their locations to make that happen. And this whole thing, it actually creates a lot of leverage. So what you see is that those people become the go-to people within their areas of someone's got a question, they might be, for all the security team's best efforts, they might still not be the most approachable. They might not be the quickest to be able to reply. So they can go to the security champion and say, I've got this question. I need to send this Excel spreadsheet to someone externally. How do I encrypt it, or how do I send it safely, or what have you? And they can normally help them out, or they can then escalate it and what have you. There's this often argument about intensity versus consistency. And October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and there are many organizations ramping up their efforts. For this month, we're going to give everyone a security tip of the day, we're going to have weekly quizzes, we're going to play a phishing game and everything. And then come November, it's back to well, November becomes Movember, and guys start growing out weird facial hair. But for a good cause, of course. But this is like the equivalent of like going to the gym for 2 weeks in January, and come November, you're like, why am I still overweight? I don't understand it. So that consistency is far more important. So small regular reminders is far more effective. And we see this, I don't have the slide here, but it's this one actually. It just shows that if we send a phishing email to our a baseline phishing email, about a third of people will end up clicking on it initially. But with regular small, and I'm not talking about massive campaigns, but with just regular awareness and those emails, you can bring it down to about 17, 18% within 3 months, and then about 5% by the end of the year. So within a year, you can really bring down the risk quite considerably. And this is last year's one. This year's one is based on a data set of 12.5 million emails from around the world. So it's a large enough data set to say this is consistent and proven methodology. It's not just 20 people partook in this study. Getting your exec team to share stories from the top is super powerful. If you can, in an organization, convince one of the execs to, during their team stand-up or whatever, town halls, whatever they call them, say oh, I received a phishing email, I nearly fell for it, or someone phoned me up or sent me a text message and I actually gave up my credentials, but then I let the security team know and they blocked it. This does a few things. This removes the stigma associated with someone getting social engineered in one form or another. They're like, oh, this could happen to anyone. It also shows that the security team won't get you fired for doing that. They'll thank you for actually reporting it. We saw a few months ago, Reddit got breached, where one of their engineers, they received I think it was an SMS message, and they were like, hey, we're from HR, and we need to send you things, send us your multi-factor authentication code. And so he replied with his multi-factor authentication code. So MFA is brilliant on its own, but if someone can give up their code, then you've kind of defeated MFA. But once he sent it, he realized that this is probably something I shouldn't have done, so then he let the security team know. And this is frantic. I put that down as a win. The fact that he gave it up, okay, but everyone can make mistakes, especially if the request is, again, framed in that way or positioned in that way. But as long as he knew how to report it to the security team were able to then lock down his account, and you minimize, rather than whatever, 200 days later, you find, there's been an attacker in our network, and no one was none the wiser. So getting people to share story from the top really helps build that culture again of openness, and it really helps. I really like the concept of a designated driver, and I was reading up about this, how did this come about? And people have been trying to do anti-drink drive campaigns for years, and it's always the same approach. Let's scare people. Let's show them that 50,000 people a year are killed or maimed in drink driving accidents, or this is how many kids are left orphaned and what have you. And that's one approach, but it's not always the most effective. And this is, again, I think security, this is the parallel with security. I think they go down a lot of times down the fear route. It's this is how much we can lose, this is how much we can do, and what have you. What a group of thinkers done, they went to Hollywood and they met their screenwriters and said, we've got this concept of a designated driver. So if a group of friends go out, one person's the sober one who's designated to make sure everyone gets home safely. And they were like, okay, we can write that in. If it doesn't interfere with our plot, we'll do it. So they started to introduce that concept in the 70s in Hollywood, in some movies and TV shows that, hey, you're the designated driver. So a group of friends go out, one of them says it, and it's just like a throwaway comment. No one even, it's not like a training. No one's elaborating on it. Your job is to not drink and not to give in or anything like that. It's just like, okay, cool. And then people watch that and say like Pedro Pascal, he's a designated driver. I identify as Pedro Pascal, of course. So I can be one. I can go out and remain sober. If he's cool enough to do it, I'm cool enough to do it. And it really had a massive impact. Obviously, nothing will bring behaviors down to zero because people are people and they're going to do what they want to do. But it had a massive, massive impact on how people behaved and how they viewed it. And so one of the techniques is like, the security team doesn't need to give every bit of security advice themselves. They can try to find their Hollywood screenwriters within the organization. So they can go to project managers and say like, this is something that we see come up a lot. Can you implement this into your processes? They can go to office managers, they can go to whoever, and leverage other organizations and departments to help spread the message that they're trying to get out there. A friend of mine, he used to work at a restaurant, and he said that they had this complimentary dessert option where if there was a group of people from work, say a group of 10 after work were on a table together, they put a small party of 2 next to them. And then for the small group of 2, they would bring out their best desserts completely for free. And the reason for that is that because they know at least one person from the group of 10 will look over and say, they look nice. Let's have 10 for this table over here. So for the cost of 2 free desserts, you've sold 10. And again, this ties in a lot with the Security Champions program. But even if you don't have an official Security Champions program, this is where that kind of like meerkat behavior comes in. Someone pops up, looks around, says, so-and-so's doing this. Maybe I should start doing this as well. So creating that environment and showing, not just telling people, but showing them this is how we go about it, this is how we do it, is very, very effective. The final part on this is a bit about choice architecture. And we hear about this a lot, like nudge theory and what have you. So I'm just looking over there. There's 2 bins over there. There's a general waste and there's a recycling bin. That's a really good example of a really good architecture, because if you're throwing something away, you're going to go towards a bin anyway. And they're right next to each other, and it takes only 30 seconds or less, or 5 seconds, to split out whatever's general waste and recycling. And so people then adopt the behavior that you want them to adopt. You're not forcing them, you're not mandating them, you sort of like nudge them into it by designing something in that way. In the tech space, we've seen this happen. So with something like a password meter is a really, really good example. It's like when you're setting up a new account and you're typing in your password, and it goes from a bar, which is red, all the way up to green, or it goes from a sad face to a smiley face. And that's shown to really nudge people, encourage them to choose a good password, because who doesn't want to make a smiley emoji appear on their screen when they're typing in a password? It's really effective. So same thing, like we see, like even in like some email program like Gmail or whatever, there's certain things like if you say I've attached this file and then you go to hit send, it'll prompt you to say like you say you've attached something but there's no attachment. Are you sure you want to send it? Things like that, but from a security perspective, can really, really help. So you can put in place things like you're sending this file externally, but you haven't encrypted it, or this contains potential PII. Are you sure you want to send it? So rather than just having a DLP that just simply blocks everything, use these as opportunities to just engage with your colleagues and give them a little nudge. A slight product sort of pitch. We've got a product called Security Coach, which integrates with your security stack, so it takes all your alerts from there. And this is pretty much what it does. It's all like, and you can choose what you want it to do. So if someone plugs in a USB, you can say, send them a Slack message saying, you plugged in a USB, are you sure you wanted to do that? Here's the policy, just in case, or what have you. Or you can give them some micro content, like, here, watch this 20-second video. Or you can just like say, okay, let's just build up a profile of these people that plug in a USB, and then we can target them specifically with some training, or we can just make sure that, okay, they know what they're doing, they need to do this as part of their job, so let's ignore it. So you have the flexibility to do that. But leveraging what your existing systems are, I don't think awareness needs to be something that's completely divorced from everything else, but if you can build it into your architecture as a whole, people will move towards doing the right thing or the behavior that you want them to do. There's this picture I saw recently. It's like, it shows the city, one with like a normal like roads and everything, and the other one with a pedestrianised zone. So there's no cars and people are walking, and it's like people will adopt to however you design your city, basically. So if you have cycle lanes and pedestrian walkways, people will actually come out and walk a lot more or use their cycles a lot more. But if you build for cars, then surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, you're going to get more cars on the road. So I think same thing within the tech space, we can architect our systems a lot better to do that. So I think am I too quick? But okay, much to your relief, there's more time for tea or questions if you want. I think understanding how the security team is perceived is really important. I also think balancing out the training. I mean, there's certain things we do need. I said, like, let's not think as trainers, think as marketers, but I think there is an element of certain things we want to do training on. That's more company specific or risk specific, but let's keep that, balance it out so there's less of that and more of the awareness. I think the culture works. We've spoken about culture a bit, but getting that buy-in from the top really helps, because then you align it with the overall strategy and focus only on a few behaviors at any one point in time. I think if you try to change everyone's behavior all together at the same time, it's going to be very, very difficult. And that's true for anything. It's like if I say I want to start having cold showers in the morning and going to the gym and running half marathons every week and play tennis and whatever, it's not going to happen. But you take one behavior, build on that, and then you do it. And it's the same thing here. So that's why, sometimes people get our platform and they say, oh, you've got like 20,000 email templates. I can't wait to try out all of them. And it's like, yeah, but you're going to fool people for sure, but you're also going to get their backs up. So let's start on what is the behavior you want to change. Start with that, send it out, build those good relations, and ultimately, and I don't think any of my sales colleagues are here, but ultimately, I think if you don't use our platform, but you encourage people to build the right relations with their colleagues and explain to them this is the thing, you probably need very little of that continuous from a product perspective, and it becomes more of like a human management problem. But the product can definitely help you get there and do that. And also just measure and monitor, because you don't know which way you're going unless you see how, I kind of messed that quote up, but okay. Baseline where you're starting, and then you can checkpoint it periodically, and you'll see what progress you're making and whether you're heading in the right direction. That sounds a lot more better. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions or whatever. But, yeah.